Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Kelly Sicat.
And my name is Donna Conwell, and we are your hosts of Scratch Space.
Scratch Space is a virtual forum hosted by the Lucas Artist Residency program at Montalvo Art Center, which is located in Saratoga, California, on the ancestral lands of the Ohlone people. With Scratch Space, we're bringing together visual artists, scholars, composers, writers, activists, and others to explore the kinds of radical imaginaries which can unfold in this moment of pandemic, racial reckoning, economic uncertainty, civil unrest, and environmental crisis.
We're interested in how do we think about what is possible? How do we use our imaginations to build a better present and future? And how can we retool and create better and more equitable models for living and working together? So tell us about our guest today, Kelly.
Thank you, Donna. I'm really excited about today. We have with us composer, musician, trombonist, performer, video-based artist from Memphis, Tennessee, Matt Petty, and Alva Rogers, who's visiting us from New York City. Alva's a playwright, a lyricist, and an educator. Both of these artists are dynamic in the scope of work they cover. We also have a guest appearance from Lisa Crafts, and Lisa is an animator and moving image artist, and she'll be joining us for a segment because she's very important to the creation of Weeping Mary as we know it.
Well, I'm really excited for this conversation. Links to our guest full bios have been posted in the chat, so you can find out more information there. We also want to give a shout out to Nathan Zanon, our producer behind the scenes. I'm going to disappear shortly, and then Kelly, Alva, and Matt will talk for about 50 minutes, and then I will return to field questions from your audience. So please post your questions and comments in the chat. Thank you, Kelly, and I will see you all soon.
Absolutely. See you soon, Donna. So while we invite Elva and Matt back to rejoin us. Hello, Matt Petty.
Hello.
I'm really delighted to have them with us today. We're going to let Elva arrive on the screen with us.
Hi.
Hi, Elva. And I want to check in with the two of you. You know, we're living in fire country in California. So Donna, Nathan, and I are sort of overcoming downed power, downed internet, and how we got here is nothing short of a miracle this morning. So what is to be will be. How are you both doing?
Doing well, thank you.
It's great to see you. We have a lot of ground to cover, and we're just going to dive in. I think what I'd like to do is hold off on how the two of you came to the collaboration, and I want our audience to know who each of you are as an artist. And you know, I've had such a pleasure of getting to know you through the residency. So I want to start with Elva, and I'm going to share my screen, Elva. You know, I first met Elva Rogers as a playwright, and she came to Montalvo to work as a playwright. She had done a project, she'd done many projects, but we had selected her, and we were reviewing a project she had worked on called The Dolls. And while Elva was with us, she was working on another project, which we had the opportunity to share over the last year in a workshop development stage reading called Roman and Julie. And Elva worked with some of the students from West Valley College on that performance. I'm curious, is that moving along during these days?
Oh yes, actually, and I'm just amazed at the timing, because last week I completed the 8th draft, which I started upon returning to New York after leaving Montalvo last fall. And I just completed the 8th draft, and it's really in a very good place. And I'm at a place now where I need to see it on its feet again. I think it's at a place where I could perhaps submit it to some other developmental opportunities so that I can get some more answers to my questions.
Well, there's no unknowns that all of us have been living in this moment of pause, and our works have shifted, our perspectives have shifted. So I'm glad you're picking it back up. So Elva, I'm going to share this screen. We're going to look at some images, and I'd like you to tell us a little bit of the background of the play, The Dolls.
Okay, and Kelly, I just want to say that the title, the complete title, is The Doll Plays.
Thank you.
And this first image is a scene which is called Harlem is in Vogue. And I borrowed that title from a historian. He was at Princeton for a long time. His name is David Levering Lewis. And he wrote a comprehensive history on the Renaissance, the Harlem Renaissance, and the Harlem Renaissance writers and artists, and also what was happening socially and politically in Harlem. And so, I use this title for this particular section. These were like little knee plays. And if any of you are familiar with the composer, the playwright director Robert Wilson, he and David Byrne collaborated on something called the knee plays. And in it, he had these little moments, which he called the knee plays, which were musical moments which brought the story on to the next phase. And so I have these doll plays. So in it, we have dolls. They are dolls. Then the dolls play dolls. The dolls even portray humans. And the dolls portray humans portraying dolls. And this is a play that was inspired by the life of a historical figure. Her name is Lennon Holder Hoyt. She studied at Columbia. She was an artist. She was a teacher, an art teacher in Harlem for many years during the time that Harlem was in vogue. And so she lived, her husband was a pharmacist, and she was a librarian, art teacher, educator. And when her husband died, she started collecting dolls. And she amassed one of the largest individual collections of dolls in the United States. And she turned the parlor and basement levels of her grand limestone into this museum. And collectors came from all around the world. And this is the block. This block you see, Hamilton Terrace and 141st Street. Hamilton Terrace is as close as you come to a cul-de-sac in New York City. And so when you get to the mouth of Hamilton Terrace, you get to Hamilton Mews, and Hamilton, his country house is right down the street, right in the park below. So you could see it if you're standing in front of Aunt Len's limestone. So yeah, this is a very stately, very historical block in Harlem. And I actually visited Aunt Len and spent a lot of time with her. And during one of my visits, there was a flood. And this is a seminal image that sort of comes up in the play. And on this particular day, I brought with me a friend. Her name is Jennifer Good, who she and her brother, they started this club called MLK for Martin Luther King. And at the time, this was a time before ATM machines, and Jennifer had her checkbook, and Aunt Len couldn't get to the bank. And Jennifer said, call the plumber, I'll pay for it. And so that image and she was so afraid of her babies being destroyed and dying, that stayed with me. And so that's a seminal image in the play.
So did you know Aunt Len when you were in college? Because this,
I had a good question. I came to because I didn't grow up with many dolls, but yet I had an obsession with dolls. So that when I was quite young, I started making them out of cloth and such. And so whenever I could go someplace and there was a museum, I looked for dolls, and I found out about Aunt Len. Um, I think I may have read an article that was written about her. This is before her death, in the New York Times. And then I just had to find her. And then I went to the address, and she was never there when you went there. And people on the block knew her, and they said, this is when she was retired. She had stopped collecting. And they said, she's probably across the street in the center where the kids play. She does games and makes dolls with the kids. And sure enough, that's where she was. And I told her how long I've been waiting to meet her. And she says, well, you have to have an appointment. I said, I know, but so anyway, she took me in, and that was the first of several visits that I made with Aunt Len.
that's terrific. I'm going to show another image from a later performance at the New World Theater. Can you just give us sort of a little bit of the story of what happens to Aunt Len within the doll plays?
Okay, so the doll plays, I started it when I was in my graduate program at Brown University. So I decided that I wanted to write about Aunt Len. She had passed away while I was at Brown, and I saw her obituary in the Times. And I said, I have to tell her story. I have to keep her alive, because I tried keeping her museum alive, and it was fruitless. And I said, I have to tell her story. So then I wrote this as my thesis, and Heather Henson, who was also in Providence at the time, she was my art director, production designer, along with Holly Laws. And so then word got out about this thesis, and then we were invited to New World Theater to do this workshop production. And we had this amazing costumer. As you can see, the costumes are really quite authentic. The wigs the yarn wigs that the dolls are wearing, I actually made them for my thesis production. So here's the premise of the play. Aunt Len is dying, and the dolls and they become very concerned. And what are they going to do? What are we going to do about Mama? And each doll, she speaks in her own lexia, meaning the babies, they're babies, and they give nurturing, they receive nurturing. The nurse doll, she's nurturing to Aunt Len at all times. There's a French fashion doll, and they're all historically based dolls based on real dolls that Aunt Len had in the collection. So with the exception of a couple of dolls who I put in, for instance, that's Grace Kelly on your far left, or your right. And she kept molded celebrity dolls in the collection just to keep the collection up to date. But there was really like stunningly beautiful porcelain, bisque, from all eras, and all different stereotypical Black dolls, and just beautiful Black dolls. And so I watched a Lifetime biography of Grace Kelly once while I was at Brown one night while I was feeding my daughter. And I was struck in the documentary that one of her best friends said that, Grace always wanted to go back to work in film. But the prince said, no, you can't. So then she, for me, became like a doll, in a gilded cage. So then I decided to make the celebrity doll, Grace Kelly doll, and who's sort of in a gilded cage. And and Grace Kelly in particular, she has a trunk, and all because the prince, she says, and the prince says, no, you may not wear those Hollywood clothes again, and he locked them in a trunk. So Grace Kelly, she's always saying, my trunk, my life in a trunk. So then, but here, when she's dying, they decide we have to keep her in our world. And how are we going to do that? We have to turn her into a doll, and then we can keep her in our world. So as you can see, there are doll representations of those dolls portrayed by actors. We didn't have time or the money to make every doll have a representation, but you can see there's a nurse doll on the couch and so forth. So then when day becomes night and night becomes day, at the time when all of them have shared, except the babies, because they don't really speak too much, their stories, and they're all historically based on how they came to be at the museum. And they all they're all layered, and they make some commentary on race relations and as well as sexism and so forth. So yeah, enough said.
It's really fantastic, Elva. And I know this use of dolls and this playfulness, sort of my understanding, it leads us to the imaginary. This is actually the Aunt Len. This is the doll that Aunt Len became in the play, correct?
That is the doll.
Beautiful face.
And here she is here.
Yeah, this is a photograph you took. I'm going to bring us to this moment of pandemic, and you actually brought her out.
Yes, she was in her home on a shelf, and I'd been locked down for maybe about 4 weeks or so. And I was just drawn to the box. I forgot that she was even in there. And I took her out and I just started photographing her. It was an Easter Sunday.
Yeah, she's so great. Elva, I want to share a little bit of what else you've been up to during this moment of COVID, because your sort of love for this place of fantasy and this kind of magical realism, you actually, I'm going to stop sharing the screen for just a moment and we're going to come back to it. But you've actually started a whole channel, correct?
Yes, I did.
Miss Rogers' Wonderful School.
Miss Rogers' Wonderful School. Yes.
So I'm going to share again, and now we're going to see, oh, look at you. Wait a minute. I've just come to you. I couldn't see either of you that whole time. So have you been with us the whole time?
No, just for the past couple of minutes. That's all.
It's Len. Auntie Len. She's fabulous. I want to just share just a brief segment of Miss Rogers' wonderful schoolhouse, correct? Because for me, Elva, we need the world to know that this is a resource, and Miss Rogers comes on every Friday at 10:30 Eastern time.
Yes, and that, what you're seeing there, that is probably an early version of Miss Rogers' Wonderful School there, because since then we have a whole new set. My composer that I write musicals with has composed an intro and an outro theme song. And yeah, and I in the beginning I just wore the hat and a white blouse, and so now I have a few other colors of Miss Rogers' Wonderful School blouses. I wanted her to be a character. Why did I do this? I am passionate about the uses of enchantment for children, particularly for all children. But I noticed that children of color have it missing in their lives in particular. And I have an MAT, I have two MFAs, but I have an MAT in teaching. I've done lots of teaching with young children, from kids from age 4 through 12. And I had been a storyteller at the Bank Street bookstore, and it's part of the Bank Street School for Education. The bookstore was just demolished on Monday, but I'd been there for several years while I was actually getting my MATs when I started. And so I developed quite a following of my children whom I taught to read through my storytelling. And when the city shut down, I was unable to be there for them, and I was told that children were coming to look for Alva. And when I'm teaching, I'm Miss Rogers, and I remember once when I was teaching at a school, and when one of my students, when I was teaching pre-K, and the student said, "Oh, Miss Rogers, what's your father's name?" And I said, "Mr. Rogers." "Mr. Rogers is your father?" "Mr. Rogers' father." And so I don't have to say anymore. But so anyway, well, I thought, well, what shall I call this? And I had been asked, this kids and their caregivers and their parents are saying, can you rent another space? And I said, you know what, let me just do something, create a resource for the children. And I want to spread enchantment through stories, through looking at the stars, sharing the wonder of the world around them, teaching children how to see and how to hear, how to use their senses, and also to share my love of classic children's literature, as well as the contemporary stories that are coming along, which I find are amazing as well.
Well, you're reminiscent of Mr. Rogers. Might have been related. I'm gonna just segue for a moment and come back to Auntie Len, and we're gonna just touch base with Matt. And Matt, tell us about the first moment you met Alva.
Well, it was, I believe it was a full moon. We were hanging out after dinner at Montalvo, and Alva was telling me about her play that she had been writing of Roman and Julie. And we got onto this conversation about Vedic astrology and synchronicities and things like this that she had been really interested in. And I also have a really big interest in those things as well. And so I think it just really kind of sparked something that kept us connected in a way that has played out in a really interesting way.
Before we go any further, I want you to tell us a little bit how you've been managing through this COVID moment. Alva started an online schoolhouse. She started a book, which is called The Secret Language of Clouds. And there's much more to the story, and I'm hoping we'll weave it together. But I want to know where you've been, what you've been working on.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've been here in Memphis when lockdown happened back in March. I was at home, not unlike everyone else. But it really kind of gave me an interesting opportunity to develop some music with my bandmate who actually lives in Los Angeles, Christy Michelle. We have been working on music for the past couple of years now, but through all of this, we've really written a lot of songs, a lot of music that we're hoping to put together on a full album, either at the very end of this year or the very early in the spring of next year. So it's kind of given us some time to focus on that project and really hone in on our sound and where we want to go from there. So it's kind of been an interesting way to develop work completely remotely. Whereas before we were working remotely, but I would fly to LA 3 or 4 times a year and we would get together and make a music video or record some stuff together. And, this has been an interesting challenge for that reason as well.
Yeah, And you shared with us a little bit the other day when we were talking about your process of making music. And it seems like this sort of fits some with the way you typically create work. It takes time, takes sort of, it's generative.
Right. Yeah. And it's kind of, it does take me a lot of time to narrow my ideas down to something that is very clear, I guess is the word. I guess I'm just the type of person that likes to throw a bunch of ideas out there that are kind of in the same realm, and then slowly pick off parts that might not be completely a part of what I'm trying to say. But what's also really great about working with Christy is she's sort of like the surgeon that surgically removes everything into a nice shape for us to work with. So
It's great. Now, will you tell us a little bit? You've got a long sort of project that you've been working on for a long time, and it's fascinating to me kind of how you're approaching the project among these ruins.
yes. Well, just to get in a little bit about that project, it's a project where I had this fascination with the town that I was living in before I moved to Memphis about 3 years ago. Was a small town in Louisiana that was the terminus of a trail known as El Camino Real that connected to Mexico City. This was in like the 1500s. And I started to learn more about that and was really interested in sort of how it made a timeline that was creating these sort of synchronicities with a lot of things that were happening in our world today during these times. And so I started researching these, traveling these trails. There turns out are 3 different ones. One goes up to San Francisco, where you guys are, Kelly, which I'm sure you know about. And then there's another one that connects to Santa Fe, New Mexico, which I also spent some time along. And all of them really do speak a lot to the effects of colonialism, even before what people think of United States colonialism. It goes back further than that. And so investigating those things, investigating what's happening now, these places, these people that I've met have started to manifest into different pieces that one day I'm hoping to put together into either a 3-part song cycle for each one of these trails. But as of now, they operate sort of as a collection of multimedia that touches on different places that I've had the chance to go deeper with so far.
That's great. And we'll come back to this, but it was in that journey of traveling those pathways that you found yourself in Weeping Mary, Texas.
Right. So Weeping Mary is a very small town. It's in East Texas. And I was first attracted to Weeping Mary because of the name. And it sort of sounded mysterious. So I went there with a friend and we visited these native mounds. The Caddo people were mound builders, and they have a state park that's there that has a lot of these mounds that you can sort of walk around, and a museum that you can visit. But just below the hill there is this town called Weeping Mary. And originally it was a freedom colony, land granted to freed people who had taken it as sort of their own town. And the folklore around the name Weeping Mary. A lot of people say that it's named after Mary Magdalene weeping at the tomb of Jesus, but another part of it says that there was a woman in that town named Mary who swore that she would never give away her land. It was that she rightfully owned, and she was tricked one day by the government who reclaimed this land, and she just wept and wept and wept, and they called her Weeping Mary, and then that became the town's name. And so it was kind of all of that stuff that came into play with the project itself. And that same night, I actually wrote the lyrics to the song Weeping Mary. And my idea for the project was at one point was to create a series of sort of music that you could listen to sort of like around a campfire in a folk music kind of style that was just really accessible to people. And that's sort of what I had in mind for it originally. And when I got out to Montalvo, a year later, I sort of had all of these little zygotes going on. And I started working on Weeping Mary again. And that's when, of course, I met Alva, who she was getting ready to leave Montalvo. I still had a few weeks to stay. And she was like, let me just give me a piece of music I can sing for you. So I was like, okay, I kind of have this.
Now, hang on. We're not there yet. So just bear with me. Tell me what this is 2018?
Yes.
And you had visited Weeping Mary in 2017.
Yes.
Sometimes I think it's really important for people to understand, I don't know, they think artists sit down and make an artwork, and sit down and just like get the job done and make an artwork. But art often, and in my experience, more often than not, it takes time. And then it has its moments when it just comes together. So I just want to hold us there a minute. I want to go back to Auntie Len and some images of Auntie Len, because Auntie Len was, the way you kind of brought her to life, Elva, and created this work that really lasted for many, many years. And the play, of course, still remains, but it was shown and seen for so long. And so for her to come and be here at this moment with you, I think is quite remarkable, that all of a sudden she was who you turned to in some way. Oh, yeah. Screen.
Well, I have to say too that
there she is.
She was expertly sculpted by the sculptor and artist Holly Laws, and it's interesting how she came back. She spoke to me on Easter Sunday, like on the day of resurrection, right? So, and so I photographed her that day, and then I put her back in her home. And then when George Floyd was assassinated is when not on that day, but maybe, I can't remember when, I'd have to look at the Instagram, because I'd never done Instagram before. And during the pandemic, I started posting a lot of images from a lot of my plays, because they actually have not been widely seen. Like Aunt Len is a New York story. She cared about her society, and she was a collector of stories and histories in New York and abroad, yet the city kind of failed her. So I'm hoping one day for a New York production, although there's been a reading there. So Aunt Len deserves many more resurrections. But getting back to this current resurrection of this puppet, because she is this is a puppet, and she's jointed. You can see her neck, she needs to be repaired, but you see there's her, even her hands are, her wrist is jointed here, and so are her legs and such. So just that, I never actually watched the footage of George Floyd, the life being squeezed out of him. I couldn't watch that because I recently lost my brother, and I don't remember what day George Floyd was murdered, but then I also lost my father to COVID at the end of March. So I just couldn't watch any footage, and I still haven't watched the footage of him having the life squeezed out of him. So I went and I got the doll, and I got a mask, and I put it over her mouth. And then I just felt compelled to, and then Breonna Taylor had also happened. So her murder also occurred around the same time. And I started photographing her with her wrist bound and her mouth covered with the sign, "I can't breathe." So I started a series of photographs.
There it is.
First posting.
And you took her out to the street.
Yeah, I photographed her in various places inside.
Yeah.
And finally, she ends up on the street in a body bag, a see-through body bag. Yeah.
Yeah. Such.
There's the word mama on her there.
Yeah. Such powerful images, and the representation of this kind of joy-filled woman who loved these dolls, instead of understanding her story or not understanding her story, and just the imagery. That moment changed everything in this pandemic for me and for many, many people. I added one additional image because this is Alva. She always comes back to some place of hope. And I think, the combination of starting this children's program and taking in this, and the loss of your father and the recent loss of your brother, and all of this is just, it's a lot. It's a lot. I guess I want to go back to you, Matt, and you both know what I'm trying to do. And I want to share a song that you created. Can you tell us a little bit, Matt, about your collaboration with Eve Beglarian?
Yeah. Prior to really, one of the first projects that really brought me to Montalvo was when I was working with my friend composer Eve Beglarian. She and I had also done a lot of traveling around the South and really all over the country, but we were working on a sort of a multimedia fantasia song cycle of sorts called Lighten Up, which was centered around American visionary visual artists. These are people who were just sort of going about their lives until they reached around middle age, when they were struck with this divine vision that changed their lives, that made them become artists, working from this very interesting sense of place. And a lot of the artists that we were working with just happened to be in the Deep South, particularly a man in Houston named Cleveland Turner, who was known as the Flower Man. He had this vision of a whirlwind of colorful junk coming out of an alcoholic coma that changed his life, changed the neighborhood he lived in, changed Houston. And his story was really fascinating and really inspiring. And while we were learning more about him in Houston, we met an art historian there named Larry Harris, and he has this amazing archive of self-taught artists. But he told us about Juanita Leonard. Sister Juanita Leonard lives in Montgomery, Louisiana, which was right next to the city I was living in, Natchitoches, Louisiana. And I had never heard of this woman. So immediately we were like, we have to go meet her and see what she's about. And the moment I met her, changed my life. She's an amazing person. She has built her own church out of found materials out in the woods that she uses to bring these, many of them homeless people, children, different addicts, different people with different, all kinds of disorders that she finds in this very small town. There where she gives them food, she gives them clothes every day. She does this every day. She has no funding. She just does this. And it's incredible. It's really incredible. And so both Eve and I were very inspired by, I mean, these are just two stories of so many people that we met, but we made this piece called All You Got to Do, which brings together a sample from a gospel CD called Black Gospel Explosion featuring Reverend Milton Brunson with Beethoven's Missa Solemnis. And the band that we were working with at the time, Kasachi Sound, was sort of the ensemble for this, but we made this piece where I brought my camera out to these different churches we went to while we were working on this project, and just asked these people who knew these artists to just gaze into the camera. And I didn't even give them any instructions. A lot of them, I think, thought they were setting up for a photo. And I just let it run until I felt like it was the right time to turn it off. And I used all of these to make this video, which I really feel kind of speaks for itself, which is just sort of, I think, a way of coping in this time, just like all times. Stand still, study yourself, be real.
Stand still, study yourself. Stand still, study yourself, be real. And God will give you the power. Won't he do it? Somebody know what I'm talking about? Won't he give you power? Power to live right. Power to think right. Power to speak right. Power to do right. God will give you power.
too. As we just, time is a thing. It's a beautiful piece. It's a powerful piece. Both of your work. Alva, you sent me the song Weeping Mary, which you and Matt met at Montalvo 2018. And I think you were just visiting us. And there's something I know when Donna returns that for us is really important about sort of artists being able to come and return, because it begins to build a deep kind of network of artists around the world and across the country. And so when you two had this time, I never knew this happened. I actually don't think Lori or Donna, anybody knew this happened. So the two of you one night after dinner maybe, or one day during the day, got together, and Matt had finished the writing of Weeping Mary. And Matt, you told the story like, unlike your other kind of processes, you sat down with the components and the piece sort of came together. And then that, the other fact that you both shared with me that I didn't know is you actually recorded it. And how many takes did it take to record? Okay, so Elva picked up the music and sang the music, and both of you have this kind of very interesting look at this mystical realism, and it's pretty amazing what's happened. Elva, I'd like you to speak just a little bit about Lisa Crafts. Hang on, I want to back up a minute. After George Floyd, it was June the 4th that Montalvo was, figuring out how we respond to this moment and what our organization was going to do in this time and how we needed to react. And I know there was some of our leadership was really wishing we had something we could share, a piece of artwork we could share at this time. And it wasn't something that felt right for me to look for or ask for. And I opened my inbox on the 4th of June, and there was an email from Alva, and she shared this song with me. And it's my understanding that Matt had said to you, you just share it when you're ready. And Montalvo was honored to be able to share this song. The song went out into the world, and Lisa Craft heard it. And Lisa was a dear friend of yours, correct, Elva?
Yes.
So Lisa's a moving image animator, a medium that Matt also works in. But can you tell us a little bit about Lisa?
We've known each other since the early 90s. And she's an incredible animator. At the time, she's made films that are in the collection at MoMA and various institutions. But she was a filmmaker for Sesame Street. They would make these short films that appeared in all the episodes, and she made many. And she asked me if I would voice some of the characters in these short films, and which I did. And I voiced them, and I also sang when the character had to sing. So we probably did about maybe 5 or 6 together, something like that. And then we've just been she lives near where my dad used to live in Tribeca. And we just became very dear, close friends. So yeah, she's a wonderful artist, and we've worked together periodically since then.
She's a beautiful artist, and I think we'll post in the chat her website. She's been very active on Instagram and currently has works up at the C24 Gallery in New York. So anybody in New York or going to New York, I think they're worth seeing. They're these beautiful sort of collaged portraits, and they're video portraits, and they're really quite fabulous. So Lisa, can you tell us a little bit about how you, sort of when you first heard the recorded version of Weeping Mary, where were you, kind of how you received that work?
Sure. Well, Alva and I have been friends for a really long time, and she sent me the audio track, which was the song, with Matt's music and Alva's voice, and I was floored. It was so emotional that I, like yourself, I listened to it several times, and I just went, wow, this song is so important, and it's so deep and rich, and I wanted to know that it would go out into the world. So I called up Alva and I said, well, how are you posting this, or how are you getting it out? And I think Alva, you can correct me, but I think you said you were putting it on Instagram, or I'm not sure.
On Instagram and on my website.
Right.
Homepage.
And then, thank you. And then I said, well, I'd love to make some images. I'm really inspired by it. And you said to go for it. So we were all in, in lockdown because of COVID. So I asked Alva to send me images from her family, and, just any images that spoke to her that seemed like they would work in the film. And of course, the beautiful puppet. And I also reached out to Matt, and he sent me some footage that he shot in Weeping Mary. And then I combined it with all kinds of images that I had on my hard drive because I wasn't going out to shoot. So they were films and clips and photographs that I had taken over probably the last 10 years in probably 5 different countries. And, I think the first thing was just hearing Alva's voice. That was a mixture of like a plea and a prayer and a prophecy and a demand. And I really felt like she was channeling. So it was really great to hear you say that, Alva, because it really felt like there was another entity in there. It was really amazing. And it really seemed to speak to this moment of pain and passion and hope for joy too. So putting the images together became an obsession. I just worked on it day and night until it was done. I think I probably sent you some version of it, Alva, before. Yeah, just make sure it felt true and see what your feedback was. Yeah.
Well, and I remember Lisa kept saying, I really want to add some images that are joyful, because I want there to be a sense of joy and hope. So I kept sending different photos from different events, with family. So I think finally I think I sent the ones that were the charm. So for her and her process.
There's a photo of you and your daughter.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That moment of joy where the song shifts and is so powerful. Matt, was that always kind of in your mind that the song would shift to that kind of, it's really this powerful moment of kind of joy, but strength and kind of, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think I had lyrically that kind of thing going on in my head about the lyric "Nothing can stop the king," which really what that meant for me was really speaking to Dr. King, living in Memphis. That same year, just about a few weeks before I went to Montalvo, I had attended the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination here in Memphis, which was very, very powerful. And I think that was really just in my subconscious, but as far as the performance, I think Alva really shifted that herself in the singing, in the song, in her channeling. It just really, I really feel like that was meant for her to do. I don't really, I can't even say that I can really claim that myself, honestly. But when I saw that paired with the moment in Lisa's video of sort of like the fireworks and just sort of like this really, really, yeah, it was a shift. It was really, there was a lot of power there, and I really, gosh, I think all of it, just one thing led to the other, you know, from this invisible thing beyond all of us. So, yeah.
How Elva and Matt, how did you, so when you saw the video, when it was finally created, the artwork that Lisa made, did it sort of complete the picture for you?
Yes, of course. It really did. Especially this, you know, there were all these subliminal, I mean, I won't, messages, like the baptismal scene of the puppet under the water rising up, and then the scenes of the church. It just put me back, even though I don't know if those, I think that may have been some of Matt's footage of it. That may have been actually the remains of some structures in Weeping Mary, but they reminded me of the church that my maternal grandparents attended, that my maternal grandfather helped build. And, you know, and that picture of my brother, you know, it was almost just like, yes, he has risen. And because that moment, I remember that was a very joyful day for him. And that was a picture that he really wanted me to have. You know, like a few years before his death, so he started sending me so many pictures that he wanted me to have. It's almost like maybe he knew he wasn't going to be around long. So it was yeah. I mean, I couldn't have imagined anything. I can't imagine anything that would have captured the feeling of the song in a more encompassing and beautiful and meaningful way than what Lisa did. So, yeah.
Thank you, Alva.
Lisa, do you have any last thoughts you want to share with us?
I guess we need to use our imagination to work on the next phase and to as you were saying earlier, to envision the world that we want to be in. And that's a good place for artists, because that's our job, is to take nothing and make something out of it, and to make something beautiful and to do collaborative works is a really strong place for us to be right now, because things aren't going to get better by themselves.
No, it really, I mean, it feels like the definition of that agency of artists, right? The real work of artists is helping us see what we can't see, right? Reflecting what we need to see, and sort of imagining what we can't see. Yeah, it's really an amazing journey from your hand, Matt, to where the song is, and I hope that it's just continues to go far and wide. I think it's an incredibly powerful work. I want to share Weeping Mary with folks, because I want to give people some time to be able to ask questions, or for us to maybe speak a little bit more after we see the video. So it was Lisa who came to you and asked if she could create the video. And she worked with both you and Matt collecting imagery. And there you can see our beautiful Aunt Len at Easter.
Like a tumbleweed, the winds of change are blowing, they're blowing, don't you see? Weeping Mary, nothing can stop the king. Ooh, sinking Peter, is that how it's got to be? Do you believe or accept this misery? The winds of change are raging. They are raging like the sea. Sink and Peter, nothing can stop the king. A storm of change is coming. It's coming like the sea. Weeping Mary, weeping Mary, weep for me. The jailers are trembling, and the towers are gonna fall. The raging winds there anybody here like the jealous trembling? Glory,
Well, we've been here for an hour. And Donna's back. When we talked to Lisa, I know for Lisa, she felt that, and Elva, you might speak to this a little, and you, Matt, that your kind of version of this song, singing this song, was almost like a channeling, almost like, it was a moment of connecting to your brother and connecting to kind of where you were. And I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. I just briefly say, and I'll defer to Matt, that so I met Matt in the fall of 2018, and my brother, I lost my brother the very beginning, January in 2018. Actually, I had been in the air and near Montalvo at Stanford, actually. And then I went to visit you all in Montalvo that weekend. And that was the last time I'd spoken to my brother. When I got back to New York a couple of days later, I got the news. But so that, I had to take care of so many things. I'd never really grieved, I guess, and I wasn't really conscious about it, but somehow that song, just the lyrics and the music, it gripped me. I just, and that was that. I mean, that's all I can say. That's, and that's, yeah.
It's an incredibly beautiful work, both of you. Matt, for you to sort of put this work down on paper, and the other thing we spoke about with Lisa was just this kind of where the song shifts, right, to this kind of joyous, hopeful, and I think that's a little bit what I hope to share today in both of your works. Just this a bit of optimism for the future and where we are and how we sort of think to the future.
I can just say quickly that was really Lisa's goal. She wanted to have hopeful images in the film. I was sending her, she says, no, this isn't hopeful enough. This isn't quite what I'm going for. And so she really pushed on that. And that was important to her because she also had lost her father around the same time. So, yeah. So I hope that whoever gets to see looks for this talk, that they take the time and listen to Lisa's contribution, because she added so much more to the conversation that I could add. And I think Matt would agree. What do you have to say, Matt?
She really did. And, you know, when we first made this song together, I don't think we had any idea the life that it would go on to have. And I'm just really thankful for both of you, for you, Alva, bringing a voice to this, and then also for Lisa to put these images together to really make it something that really, I think, means a lot in these times we're in. And yeah, she's an incredible artist, and I'm just really glad that we had this chance to get together to you know, really make something of this nature.
Nathan has sent me a message. You will absolutely include it. So we'll stitch Lisa into our conversation, and the recorded version will have her.
I would just like to add two more things. I concur with everything you said, Matt, and I would just also like to say that so often, like, many of us, we don't work in a vacuum. You know, there's inspiration, and there's also just people helping. And regarding Miss Rogers' wonderful school, I would not have been able to really launch it and do it every week without the help of my person who's behind the scenes, Brenna Ross, who's a producer here at Ibex Puppetry. So I'm really grateful for her, grateful to you, Matt. And actually, I have so much gratitude to Montalvo. You've given me so much, and I feel like this song is such a little thing to give you in return. Thank you all. And thank you all out there who are with us today.
Well, thank you. You both have given us so much. And I think, you know, Donna and I probably miss the most the time around the table, the time knowing we're actually holding a physical space for artists to meet and come together and do things that probably so often we never even know about. Yeah. Donna, do you have any?
Well, I want to thank you so much for sharing your incredible work with us today, and for such a moving and inspiring, thoughtful conversation. We have a couple of questions that have come in, and you know, I also have a question that I'd like to ask. You know, we've been talking a lot about radical imagination in this series of scratch-based conversations, and the sort of idea of thinking about imagination. You can think about your own kind of unique mental worlds, but our mental worlds are also our shared imaginative landscapes that we kind of construct through the stories we tell ourselves. And thinking about that, I'd like to ask you a question about folklore, because I was struck with your description of the folklore around the name of the town Weeping Mary. And Alva, you've, I believe, integrated folk tales into your work with The Crane Wife, maybe. And of course, your interest in use of enchantment. And Matt, I know you have an ongoing interest in folklore, and you followed the work of sort of outsider folk artists in a number of projects. So I'd just like to ask you, what does folklore have to tell us, do you think, about our past, present, and future at this moment, if anything, and how does it help us imagine our world?
I guess I can just say really briefly, I feel like, you know, it's, I think one of the reasons why I'm so interested in folklore is that it's actually taught me a lot of things that I otherwise wouldn't have learned in any kind of school situation. And so what I've come to realize through just all of the work and all of the opportunities I've had to meet people is that, you know, what I feel makes a place special is the people in that space and the relationships you make with those people that contribute to your own life. And I don't see how, you can't be inspired by the lives of common folk, because that's really who end up making the stories that we all learn and get inspired by. So that's my answer.
Thank you. How about you, Alva?
Well, in my opinion, folklore is quite basic. It's a basic original language before, at least in this country, American folklore. I'm referring to American folklore. And you did mention that I have used folklore in my work. And for instance, I've adapted a folk tale, because you see, these folk tales, they are carried throughout the world. So each culture has its own version of this story. For instance, the Crane Wife, Japanese folktale. I adapted it to St. Helena, South Carolina, and then I turned it into a one-act opera, chamber opera, with my composer Bruce Monroe. And then we also wrote a companion piece to that, which was a folk tale that's originated in St. Helena, South Carolina, called Mermaid. And it's basically a retelling of the European Cinderella story. So basically, these stories, it's a way of life. It's about human nature, basically. And I noticed that there is a question here: how good is art at capturing love and memory? I think folklore, it's in the same way that Aunt Len captured, basically her museum is a collective memory. And I think folklore is a collective memory of a culture, a culture before the influences of commerce, I don't want to say corrupted it, but robbed it of its simplicity and purity. And I think that being in this time of this feels like a sort of a post-apocalyptic dystopian time that we're living in, going back and paying attention to how, because that's how we're all living right now. We're all living in a very basic way. We all have to we're all without artifice. Many of us, I guess some of us have enough commerce in their lives, and so that they can pretend that it's not, that they can exist without going back to that very basic. But we all, on some level, are having to live at that very basic level. And now we are all involved in a collective creation of a collective memory of this time. And so, yeah, it's part of everything I do. And I think it's just very important. And I think that we all have our ear to the ground for that right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That was a beautiful response. So I'm wondering, we do have one other question, but I'm mindful of time. So Kelly, why don't you, should we finish there? Or? Sorry, I can't hear you.
Let's do the last question. And
okay.
Make it a wrap.
About how are you finding spaces to connect and to cultivate senses of belonging and artistic community at this time? If I also have another one, if that's not inspiring any other responses.
On Montalvo is providing this venue here, and that's a way of, this has brought us all together. I think that when I speak to many artists that I know, it seems that everyone is connecting somehow to, even if it's just one other person in their world, in their network. You know, we're all finding ways. Like, I've recently sort of reconnected with a friend, an artist friend from high school, and it's just different. That's all. We haven't given up on being connected. It's just very different. It's not the way we want it to be, but we're communicating, but via Zoom, email, calling, a text. We have to remain. And then also it's a time to be internal, really, so that we can reflect. This time is a time of reflection. And then what's going to come out of this reflection, the way the connection will change once we move to the other side of this, we're yet to know what that's going to look like, I think. But
yeah,
Nat?
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I feel like I'm very, very thankful for the opportunities that Zoom has provided me with connecting not only with Montalvo friends, but just friends and family members that otherwise it just wouldn't be the same. And what I've just really kind of started to look at in like a bigger picture is that the way I'm seeing everyone these days, with masks, is looking into everyone's eyes, and they say that the eyes are the windows to the soul. And so it's just really given me this whole view of souls occupying space and how we occupy that space and the type of healing that can bring in the spaces we occupy is something that maybe we may have taken for granted before all of this. And so the lessons, despite all of the things that this year has brought, I really feel like the lessons in love and connection have been some of the most powerful things that I don't think we would have had gifted to us in any other way. And so I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, that's so right. Thank you.
Can't thank you both enough for being here, for sharing yourselves, and for taking this time. I think that's what we have time for today. That ended it perfectly.
So should I tell everyone what we have coming up next week? Yeah, so next week, we hope you're going to join us for a conversation with artists Hector Dionisio Mendoza, Amelia Mesa Baines, Viviana Paredes, and Pilar Aguero Esparza. They're going to be discussing their shared interest in ritual, memory, and tradition. And we're going to be considering the Mexican tradition of Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, and kind of looking at that in the context of being in a time of pandemic and the importance of ritual in these sort of moments of uncertainty and crisis. And we're organizing this conversation in association with a Dia de los Muertos altar that Dionisio is going to be constructing on the grounds at Montalvo. So if you have specific people, and this is to all of our audience and of course our panelists, if you have specific people you'd like to be included in this altar of remembrance, please email a photograph and the person's name to Kelly's email, which we're going to add into the chat now. And we'll print the image out and arrange it on the altar. You can visit the park and the altar during park hours from October 28th through November 4th. And we'll also post photographs of the altar on our Instagram and other social media. So yes, please join us for that conversation. And if you would like to participate, please send us your images.
I have one more thing. Is it your birthday today, Elva?
Yes, it is.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Elva.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
It just came up in the chat. Thank you all so much.